So I was 10 years old when I was born in Poland. And my family, my father, probably born in Poland. My mother could have been born somewhere more east, like in the Russian things. And then I had 3 brothers. 2 of them older than I am. One was the oldest, who was 7 years older than I, and the other one was 6 years older than I, and I was the youngest. And my father was fairly well off, had real estate, owned 6 or 7 buildings, and a high school with all the trim that goes with it. And we had also, my mother's sister went to Germany, obviously somewhere before. Remember, I'm 10 years old. So some of the information that I have is only because I've absorbed it and know about it. Otherwise, probably would never even know about that. So my mother's sister went to Germany. As a matter of fact, her brother also came to United States. And I'll tell you a story about that. But I don't know whether I'm going to have enough time to do that. So there were good times where we were. And eventually, on April 20th, 1939, we moved from the place where I was born on totally different neighborhood. It's like comparing your neighborhood now to where we lived, okay? And April 20, incidentally, happens to be Hitler's birthday. So there was already a lot of things going on the streets. The Poles were already incited about what was coming up. And everybody expected that war is going to come off sooner or later. There were pogroms, but not about Jews, basically about the German stores that were attacked by Polish hooligans, and probably by normal guys who really wanted to show them that they are starting with something. And eventually comes September 1, and Hitler goes on radio and declares war. 2 days later, 1 day later, England and France joins Poland against the Germans. So the population of the place that I was born in was like 600,000 people, of which a little under 50% were Jewish. Was a very Jewish town, cultural, with art and music, etc. The Poles thought that because they had this great cavalry, which they bragged about for years beforehand, that they were able to withstand and create maybe some sort of a buffer. But 5 days later, the German army was already in the place that I was born in, and that was called Lodz, L-O-D-Z. Okay, population, as I said, 600,000. And people then at that point were deciding whether they want to go east because Russia started coming in from there and occupying, and Germany come from the other side, and eventually they met at a river that divides Poland in two. And that was like about 6, 7 days, maybe 2 weeks after the war started. And the Germans came in, and immediately, probably took less than 24 or 48 hours, declared embargoes that no Jews can have no radio, no television, even though there were very few, no money, no gold, no diamonds, no anything basically that was of value. So the Jewish people, of course, knew that this wasn't just the beginning, because when Hitler organized his party and so in 1933, one of the first Mein Kampf, the book that he wrote about, was about, it's like you have books written about our current president. So there were books written about the other president, and I'm talking about Hitler. Anyway, this is now, you talk about September. By November, everything was already being tightened, and they were building a ghetto of the better situation, better places that people were moving. And we were then having a signs that we have to go, everybody has to go to the ghetto and stay there. And what do you call it, fences were all around, and nobody was able to do. So we eventually found an apartment there. And I forgot to mention that the sister, my mother's sister, her husband, and they had a young boy. He was 2 years older, so he was 12 years old, very wealthy. He had a fur department store, owned that, in Berlin, born in Berlin, went to war for Germany at the first war, and was even had medals for that. But in November 9, 1938, they threw out most of the Jewish rich people from Germany and sent him by train to a Polish border. And they sent him to the border. And so, of course, he came to us and stayed with us. And just before 2 or 3, 4 months later, the wife closed up her business. I don't know what she did. Remember, again, I'm only at that point 11 years old. So I really didn't know everything that was going on, and I was just able to absorb most of it. My father, of course, couldn't go to work. My mother couldn't go. There was no school anymore. So as of September, or even before, I finished the last 3 years of school in May of '39. So since then, I've never been in a school again. We stay in the ghetto. And the ghetto is, at first, the first month or two, incidentally, my oldest brother was a musician. My father, in addition to being fairly wealthy, was also the conductor of the symphony orchestra and lodge. So for the first month or two, when people went to the ghetto and settled or so on, there was still some culture and music and so on things, but then eventually it sort of died out because there was no food and there was nothing else, and we worked for 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. My first job, now I'm here, probably I'm, 10 and a half, maybe 11. I was making, on a horse, on a wooden horse, I was making collars for dogs for Russia, for Germany, which they were preparing to go ahead and pass Russia, that was on the other side of the river, and continue and take over more. And that happened like maybe 2 years later. So conditions in the ghetto horrible. People were dying on the street. Food was not available. No cats, no dogs, no horses, no any living things, because whatever somebody had in the beginning, they would eat that up. 4 years later, we are still in this ghetto. And the ghetto is being not invaded, but people, German trucks were coming in on almost a daily basis. And they had selections. The selections were that European people, when they build a house or building, I'm talking about a rental, okay, regular thing. The ghetto was led by a Jewish fellow who was called the marshal. His name is Rumkowski, and he was the leader of everything that was going on. Trucks that were coming in to make selections. Everybody had to go down, and they picked kids or families under 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. If you were just small and tiny, they would grab you, put you on the truck, and the truck would leave, and then would never hear from anybody. So that happened consecutive every second day, every third day, or whatever. Eventually, it came to a point that the Germans asked the president, Rumkowski, to select 24,000 kids under 10. Now, I'm already there, I'm now 14 or 13. So even though I knew that I could have had a problem, so he he worked with the Germans and tried to eliminate that 24,000, but he exceeded to 20,000 kids. So 20,000 kids were put on trucks. Parents were bringing them to whatever stations, or trucks were coming in to the buildings in Europe are built where there's usually a things in the middle. So everybody has a view of that. So when you go down for a selection, it's like they know exactly what, if there are people or not. And basically that was one of the quick things. So anyway, so then we come to September 1944. No, August 1940. And the Germans are cleaning up this ghetto totally. And they tell you, they have big signs and so on. We are going to take you into another warmer climate with great things, and you're going to be so much better off, etc. So a lot of people would believe that, and they started, at that point it started trains. I'm talking about not regular trains, but trains that you can put in horses and cows and pigs. So these were all, what do you call a train like that?
Livestock, cattle trains.
Cattle trains.
Yeah.
Cattle trains, that's a better word. We were trying to sort of set back and not volunteer, not come down, because people were coming down to the train station with like valises, whatever they still had, and picked up, maybe probably good clothing and so on. And we did probably the same thing. And eventually, the last day, August 28, 1944, my family went down to the train station, and they pushed us in to the train, or to the wagon, to the train. And I don't know how many were in that train, probably about 100, maybe 150 per things. So nobody had any place to sit down or do anything other than just stand. Even if you had to do some things from So even if you wanted to release yourself from anything, you couldn't. We were fortunate that one of the guys who was in the train must have been like he had a little thing with hammers and tools, and it took 4 days, and we wound up in Auschwitz. When the doors opened up, and we saw that there were chimneys. There were like 3 or 4 huge chimneys where people were burned, and you could smell that. We knew right away because we had thoughts that that's going to be the thing. And women were separated from men. And so my mother, when she was separated, just mentioned that if we survive any of that, we're going to meet together back in Poland, where we left at the end in our apartment. My father and my 2 brothers, my cousin, and my uncle at that point was already dead from the ghetto. My aunt was dead because people couldn't survive, couldn't have enough food, couldn't have enough of anything. There was no doctors, there was no hospitals in there. So you can just imagine, cannot imagine how difficult situations were there. But Auschwitz was even worse because Auschwitz, they set you up for men. I don't know about women, even though I think women sort of took the same kind of a thing. That they were set in one place, and they set you up in rows of 5, and you were going. If you were going left, at that point we didn't know. Now I know, of course, about it. So we had the row of 5 with my 2 brothers, my cousin, myself, but that's 4, and my father. That's 5. As we go by, the German guy who's like just standing there looking, the German guy pulled the umbrella and pulled my father out. My father was at the time 40, maybe 42. My mother was in her late 30s, maybe 40. So he pulled my father out, and of course we knew right away, even 5 minutes later, because there were Jewish police, couple, that's called, who were supervising and making sure that everything was going on right, and that the people who were supposed to be saved for labor would go just one way. But the other ones, of course, were going straight, and they were going straight into the ovens. And that's how that smell, when you stayed there, it was unmistakable. Everybody just knew what was going on. So I think I had enough. I tell everybody that when I came here, I was in charge of a floor. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, now the only thing is that the floor that I'm in charge of is a floor that needs to be cleaned, washed, and kept so on. So I was a shipping boy, because at that point, when I came to this country, I was already 17 and a half. My brother, my older brother, had to wait for me because you couldn't come to the United States unless you had I was a minor. So Sigmund came with me. He had to wait for me in Landsberg. Let's say that was a displaced person came.
Last question. Republican or Democrat?
Strong. Democrat.
Okay.
He comes off as a Republican, far from it.
Fiscally, he's a Republican.
Bye. Everyone, I think that's time.